prison light sputtered, flashed white, and then snapped back on just long enough for James to see dozens of officers rushing through hallways in confusion. Radios crackled with incomplete messages, doors opening on their own, cameras rebooting with distorted feeds, inmates regrouping in unexpected places. Red Valley was no longer reacting to chaos. It was being guided into it. James ran through the yard, breath sharp in his chest. Every hallway echoed with the sound of slamming steel and distant shouts. Nothing felt random anymore. Every glitch, every outage, every door that opened. It was all part of a pattern designed by someone who understood Red Valley better than anyone working there. James and Officer Lewis headed toward the service stairwell after officers reported hearing movement in a restricted area. When they reached the stairwell entrance, the door was cracked open, as if someone had just slipped through. A faint emergency light flickered inside, casting long shadows down the narrow steps. James hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The deeper they went, the colder it became, the kind of cold that didn't come from broken heating systems. It felt like they were being watched from somewhere below. And as the stairwell twisted downward, the sound of the prison above faded, replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. At the bottom of the stairs, James entered the abandoned E-block corridor, a stretch of the prison closed years ago after a violent incident no one fully explained. Deep scratches marked the walls. Old metal doors were dented as if someone had tried to force its way out. James moved slowly, flashlight trembling slightly. E-block was supposed to be empty, off-limits, sealed. But now doors stood halfway open, dust disturbed across the floor. "Someone's been here," Lewis whispered. James didn't need to hear it. He could feel it. In one of the last cells, James found an older man sitting perfectly upright on a metal bunk, Warden Henry Price. He had disappeared 5 years earlier under circumstances the prison administration never clarified. Now he sat calmly, as if waiting. Price raised his head, eyes reflecting the beam of James's flashlight. "Carter," he said softly, "you weren't supposed to see this." The calmness in his voice, the certainty, it didn't match the chaos above. James couldn't tell if Price was relieved or disappointed. Before James could question him, the entire corridor shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. A thunderous boom echoed through the building. The emergency generator had blown. The red and green lock lights across E-block flickered wildly. Then, one by one, the heavy steel cell doors snapped open. Price closed his eyes, almost peacefully. "It's begun." James felt the hair rise on his arms. If the generator failed, the last fail-safe system had collapsed. Whoever was behind this wasn't just interfering. They were overriding the deepest level of Red Valley's infrastructure. James and Lewis rushed back up the stairwell with Price between them. Above, sirens wailed in disharmony. Officers shouted over radios that were half-static. Every level they passed grew louder, hotter, more frantic. James's mind raced. If someone had planned this, why reveal Price? Why open E-block? James could feel the prison's energy building into something explosive. Every step upward felt like climbing out a trap, but also stepping into a larger one they didn't yet understand. When James reached the upper hallway, he found Officers Bell and Lewis facing a tense confrontation. Bell held a baton raised, trying to control a group of inmates who had slipped out during the blackout. Lewis moved in with caution, trying to de-escalate before tensions boiled over. James stepped between them, demanding order, his voice echoing sharply through the flickering hallway. This wasn't the main explosion. This was the pressure building right before it. And everyone knew something bigger was coming. The hallway erupted when Mason suddenly lunged from behind a group of inmates, attacking Bell and throwing the entire corridor into chaos. James swung his arm, knocking the gun aside just as it fired into the ceiling, showering the hallway with sparks. The prisoners ducked. Officers scrambled, and every sound amplified the chaos, shaking Red Valley apart. James wrestled with Mason, barely staying on his feet. It felt coordinated, like Mason had been waiting for the exact moment the prison was most unstable. Someone was directing him. Someone was timing everything perfectly. Lewis's radio suddenly crackled to life with an urgent message as a light blinked on the security map. Someone had triggered an emergency code that officers hadn't used in years. a code meant only for catastrophic internal takeover attempts. James stared at the blinking red icon marking Sector South 3. That was where the old security room was located. The same room Maddox had appeared on the camera earlier. The same room where mysterious messages had flashed. Whoever was behind this wasn't improvising. They were following a blueprint. James Lewis, and Price shoved into the warden's old office. Papers were scattered everywhere. A lamp lay shattered on the floor. The American flag in the corner tilted sideways. Price walked straight to a painting on the wall and lifted it, revealing a hidden safe. James realized then Price wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He knew exactly what he was doing. "It's time you understand what Red Valley was built for," Price said, spinning the safe's dial with practiced precision. James felt his pulse thudding in his ears. Inside the safe, Price pulled out a thick folder labeled E-Block. Special program. Old photos, documents, and a flash drive lay inside. James didn't understand. "What program?" he demanded. Price looked up with calm, almost regretful eyes. "The gangs think they run this prison. The officers think they maintain order. But Red Valley was designed to control something much bigger. And today, someone has activated the final phase." Inside the safe, Price pulled out a thick folder labeled E-Block. Special program. Old photos, documents, and a flash drive lay inside. James didn't understand. "What program?" he demanded. Price looked up with calm, almost regretful eyes. "The gangs think they run this prison. The officers think they maintain order. But Red Valley was designed to control something much bigger. And today, someone has activated the final phase." The computer began uploading data. Files from the E-Block program, footage from the past few hours, evidence that could expose everything. The progress bar crawled upward. 68%, 75%, 82%. The lights in the room dimmed again as the backup power neared its end. James watched the bar anxiously, knowing this transmission might be their only way to reveal the truth. Price and Mason stood on opposite sides of the room, tension radiating off both of them. Every second mattered. Every flicker in the lights signaled a possible collapse of the only plan they had left. Suddenly, a blinding white light flooded through the broken blinds. The sound of engines, doors slamming, and metallic clicks echoed from outside. Then the powerful voice of a police loudspeaker blasted through the walls. "This is Federal Response Unit. Come out slowly with your hands up." James stepped toward the window and saw dozens of vehicles, floodlights cutting through the night, armed teams covering every exit. Red Valley had been surrounded. Whatever had begun inside had now drawn the full force of the outside world. But none of those officers knew what they were walking into. Not yet. James, Price, Mason, Bell, and Lewis moved slowly down the long corridor, their hands raised high, each step echoing through collapsing prison. The backup power had already failed, leaving only thin bands of red emergency light flickering across the walls. Dust drifted from the ceiling like falling ash, settling on their uniforms, on their faces, on the broken floor beneath them. Sirens from the police outside pulsed through the concrete, making the whole hallway tremble with each blast of sound. It felt less like they were walking toward freedom, and more like they were leaving the ruins of a battlefield they barely survived. Behind them, doors slammed, metal groaned, and distant shouts bounced along the walls, reminding them that Red Valley was no longer under anyone's control. As the group approached the main exit, James felt the weight of everything they had seen pressing heavily on his chest. The gangs, the secret messages, the hacked systems, the sudden power failures, the shadowy figures. None of it had been random. Someone had used the rivalries inside the prison like pieces on a board, moving them at the perfect moment, pushing the entire institution toward chaos. Price walked beside him with his jaw clenched tight. Mason limped forward with exhaustion in every breath, and Bell and Lewis kept glancing over their shoulders like they expected the darkness itself to attack. Every officer there had faced riots, lockdowns, and gang wars before, but nothing like this. This wasn't a prison incident. This was a coordinated takeover, planned, calculated, and executed by someone who knew Red Valley better than the people who worked there. When they finally reached the final door, leading out to the police floodlights, James paused and looked back one last time. The corridor behind them seemed to stretch forever into blackness. swallowing the flickering red lights and every trace of what had happened. And in that silence, just for a moment, James felt it again, the sense that someone was watching from the shadows. Someone who wasn't done. Someone who wanted the gangs to rise, the officers to fall, and the entire system to be rewritten from the inside out. As the steel exit door swung open and the bright white light from outside washed over them, James realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the first chapter of a much bigger war, one that had already begun long before the riots, and one that was far from over